Hi, it's Jez here from Nigezza.co.uk. Thank you for joining me today. So I am going to be creating some vintage things. I'm doing a blog hop and the theme is vintage. So it's showing how we can use Stampin' Up products to make things look vintage. So I'm going to show you some of my favourite sets for making things vintage. And if you watch me often, you will see that I use this often. I particularly use the script and the leaves. That's a very vintage looking frame. I like that border as well, and it's got some useful sentiments for card making. So yes, and you can see that the script particularly has been used loads. This is another one that I like for vintaging things. Those dots, I use that all the time when I'm making journals to give an aged look to something, and I love that script there, which is like typing that's sort of been worn out. The florals also look really good as well. And then we've got some new stamps in the new January to June mini catalogue, and there we've got some more type worn script as well, which is useful. Always like a bit of foliage in my journals. This one you might look at it and go, nothing vintage about that, but it's more the dies that go with this, which I've put my dies down here. You may have seen a video I've already done on making vintage tickets, but this is a bundle and you save 10% by buying these together. So that outline gets cut out with that die. Those little stripe bits I used at the ends of the tickets, which I thought gave a nice effect. And there's a little bit of dots there, which I use in the same way as that dot there. It's just a smaller one. This set, I used this recently in a Facebook Live, and I made some pretty cards with it, and I also thought that they could be made to look vintage really easily. So I'm going to be using this today, and there's a lovely sentiment on there which I thought would be lovely for a tag in a vintage journal. And then we've got embossing folders. I love this one. I've got a video on making a vintage tag where I use this. I use this for when I've made faux stamps as well. So it's called type worn, and that's what it is. It's like worn out typing, a little bit like these images. It's like typing that's been worn away, so that gives a really lovely vintage look. Another thing I use here is this mask in particular, sort of just doing a little bit of inking through this gives a nice, I feel that this is quite a nice little vintage sort of pattern, so I use that. These are the tailored made tags. I use these all the time in my journals for making tags. I've got an example just here I've just spied on my desk, which I'm partially through sorting out. So, and that's a bit of making things look vintage, and you can see some of the stamps that I've just shown you used on these as well. The Encircled in Beauty dies, I make doilies out of these all the time to add to any tags that I am making, and those are just a must-have for me. And then this is a new die set that goes with the Artfully Layered, and it's got foliage, which is always nice. I love this stitched end, which I did do on a card, which, oh, I can't show you it because I sent it to my father-in-law for his birthday, which is tomorrow, but it will be last week probably by the time you see this video. So that gives a nice edge, which I thought I'd use. And then it's got these two dies here that give texture, and I thought they would be great to do some vintaging with. So that's that. So I've got some bits of DSP. I cut it down to make it easier, and then the inks I'm going to use. So I've got Cinnamon Cider, so that's one of the ink colours that's going to be retiring when this current annual catalogue retires in May. I think I've got the right date there. It reminds me a little bit of Vintage Photo by another brand, and I really like it. And then we've got the sort of brown shades from the Neutral collection, and I use these all the time. Early Espresso I use for when I want a dark accent on something. Soft Suede I use just all the time. That's one of my, that's like my go-to. Really like that. The colour of this matches really well the writing in the Edith Holding book, which is very popular with junk journalers. And then we've got Crumb Cake and Sahara Sand, and they're really nice for giving that sort of coffee stained, tea stained look to something, an aged look. So these is what I use, and a blending brush. Also I use sponge daubers, so I've always got sponge daubers for each of these colours in a little jar next to me. I've also got one of these as well, and I've even got big square one that needs changing, or rectangle even. So I've got lots and lots of things that I use for blending. I've also got the re-inkers for these, which are sometimes put in a spritzing bottle with either water or alcohol to change them colours that way. So that's just some ideas of how I do it. Sometimes I do it with just blending, and sometimes I'll put it on my glass mat and put the ink directly on that. So I'll show you a couple of different ways of doing it. So let's just do some ink blending. So I get something to go underneath this, and let's take some Crumb Cake. So it's got white in it as well, so you'll see the ink should go differently where there's white bits to where there's coloured bits, and you can see that what you get is that the edge of the paper is getting a nice dark edge, which lots of people that do vintage things like myself were a bit obsessed with inking our edges. So I just like to go around. I like to sort of create a bit of an ombre effect, so you get it darker at the edges, going in lighter, and we can see in the middle there it's hardly touched, but I do want the middle to have some to be a bit more vintaged. So I'd start off the page as opposed to going straight in, because I don't want the splodge. I want it to look a little bit more sort of natural. Now you can see, depending on, you can work some areas more than others, and you get a darker look and a lighter look. Where things age, they don't age necessarily even, so you would get an uneven look about it. And then you can bring in the stamps, and you can add to that. So I like this one. So I like to add a little bit of a little bit of dottage around. And then I can do some other colours as well if I think, oh, maybe I need a little bit of more darkness on there. So I might come in with some soft suede so that I get a little bit darker, maybe around the corners. Because if things are handled, they're handled at the edges, so they will be darker than, say, the middle bit. So now that's looking quite old, and you can see where the outline of the flowers has come out really well there. So I could do a bit more on here to bring out that flower there, which was what I wanted. So you can see that flower coming out much better there, as opposed to it still being quite white in these places. So that's what I want to work on now, getting those flower images up. So I'm just going gently round in a circle. And I quite like the fact that that's sort of giving an uneven print there of the flowers, so that does look like maybe a bit of faded wallpaper. And I really like the way that that's sort of come out there. So you could stop there and then use that then on a nice vintage card as a card front or on a tag. So that's that way of doing it. I'm just gonna actually show on here, because that's got a white background, how that sort of very quickly changes that instantly to something a little bit more vintage. You can see the difference there, that immediately that looks vintage by just brushing on some ink. Now for these ones I thought I'd do something a little bit different, but let's just do a little bit here with the ink on. Quite a nice look there, but we can do a little bit quicker if I just take them off. I think I did this with my Christmas folio. Just move this out of the way. So sorry about the glares that you're going to get. So I'm going to take some crumb cake and I'm going to put that down on my glass mat. If you haven't got a glass mat, you can use anything that's sort of plasticky. So the inside of cereal boxes is quite good, you know, what holds the cereal. So I'm going to give this a spray with water. This is just tap water in there, nothing special. And then we can just lay it down and see what happens. And you get all sorts of different designs coming out depending on how you place it. That's another way of getting it. So you can leave that to dry, and there where you've got some lighter bits, you can sponge over that if you want to, or you can just go back in there and make sure those bits pick up some ink. So the paper getting quite wet, so I would sort of leave that to dry either in the sunshine or on a radiator, and then come in with a brush, brush that a bit, put some more water in it. This will be much lighter to give another effect. On your paper. So that's quite a different look to what we're getting there. And then we can just mop up other areas. And I think the marbling of the paper behind, the pattern behind, really enhances the vintage look of this sort of technique of doing it. So liking that. So I'm going to leave those to dry, clean up, and we'll look at other things. So if we take these cards that I made yesterday, we can turn that into vintage simply by changing the colour that we're going to stamp with. So changing the cardstock to very vanilla, and changing the colours to the neutrals. So I'm going to stamp the stem in Early Espresso. So sort of going for a sort of a sepia photograph look. So that's the stem, and then going to go for soft suede and crumb cake. So we'll stamp crumb cake as the background. These are two-step stamping, so I'll just wipe that bit off there. So this is the bigger section of the flower, and they meet up with these bits. I might stamp that down. And then going to use soft suede for the second bit of stamping, which is the darker section of the flowers that goes on top of all these. It seems to be, I've got a really sore thumb today. The joint in this thumb really hurts, so I might be doing something wrong. So there's our flower there, and then with this little one, I wanted a flower on that spare stem, so stamping it in soft suede and then stamping again in second generation, so it gives you a little bit of a look of these flowers there. So that immediately looks more vintage. And what I did with this was I used this lovely frame die, which I think makes it look quite vintage in itself, and I cut it out. So I'm just going to cut that out. This is the ornate layer dies, so I'm going to get that cut out. So that's it, die cut out. And before I take the die off it, I'm going to do a bit of ink in, like I did on the card. So I'm going to take, I think, some crumb cake, a blending brush, And I'm going to go just round the edges. Turn it round and do the bottom. Come in the sides. I'm just holding the die in place a bit to make sure it doesn't move. And so now when we take that off, we can see the effect we've got with a little bit of, we've still got the cream on the edge, which is what I did with this card, only in pinks. So I think that looks a little bit like a nice sort of vintage sepia sort of picture. And what I'd like to do now is take my soft suede sponge dauber, which is that one, and I'm going to go around the edges in soft suede. And I actually think I'm going to come in a little bit more. So it gives the impression of a layering going on there. There we go. So that's like that. You could add some stamping to it to make it look a bit more sort of aged. With these dots, there's probably enough ink already on that to add around it. Just quite subtle. And you could come in with some script as well if you wanted to. And I thought I could recreate this card, giving it a vintage look, by using some of that paper that we've dyed. I could either use this, although I think that's got a little bit too much of the pink coming through. I'm not sure. So I could put that behind it like I did that one, but I think I'm probably going to go for one of the ones that I have just dyed. I'm going to see if they're dry now. So the paper's now dry, so I put it on the radiator so it's curled up a little bit. You can just place it under a heavy book and it will flatten, or you can iron it, but if you're gluing it down, it's not something I worry too much about. So I might put some inking around these, and I might add some Stampin. And I'm thinking that one of these I'll use in place of that DSP. And I thought the background I might emboss. So I've got a bit of Very Vanilla, and so I'm going to use this typed worn embossing folder to emboss this, which will be at the back panel, and then I'll probably ink that as well, so I can do all the inking at the same time. So that's all embossed there, and you can see what that looks like. So I'm going to give that a bit of inking to bring out that embossing a bit more. Move that out of the way, so I don't want that to get inkied. So crumb cake, and if you just lightly go over it, it picks up the embossed bits, and you see that they're showing a bit more prominently now as you add the ink. So there you can see how that sort of changes the look completely of it, and that goes on the back there quite nicely. I want to add some ink to these papers there where none of the ink was transferred on. Just want to get rid of some of that white we can see. That's a bit better. And then on the other sheet, because I'm not sure which one I want to use. So that's them done. So I want to put a bit of inking on it. I think I might use my script from Versailles. So I'm going to put it on there. And I like to take the paper to the ink pad. So I'm going to ink it up. And then if I just press down in different places, you just get a hint as opposed to all of it. And it's now taking on the look of vintage paper much more there by doing that. Yep. And I did have a think I might put some down there as well. Maybe up there. Just give it a little bit of something. I think it needs a bit more ink on it. Yep. That's cool, I like that. And oh, I might do some on this sheet as well. Just think that really adds to the vintage nature of what we're trying to create. Just show a bit on this one. So now I want to cut a panel out of this to layer up like I did in this card. And for this one I used this die from the Scalloped Contour dies, and I thought I might go for, out of the same set as that one, the Ornate Layers, I was thinking I might go for this more fancy edge, thinking that that looks a little bit more, I don't know, Victorian, vintage. I think it certainly gives it a grander looking frame. So I think I'm going to die cut this. So and choose my section that I'm going to cut out. It's a bit more grungier over here, but you're actually not going to see much of it. You're only going to see the edging, so I might save that for something that I might see it more of, and die cut out on this side. So that's it cut out, and I've got that nice strip there. And something that I thought about was I could make some really nice doilies from this section. So I could use these smaller dies to cut out a few little doilies. I could even do a partial one, because if I'm sticking it on a tag, sometimes I don't need a whole one. So that's, I think, quite a good use of that scrap there. So I might cut those out in a moment. So, and we've got that little bit there as well, so I can do some partial doilies with that. So I might just get my die brush for that. It'll be quicker than poking it all out individually. There we are, that's most of them got out. Let me just check over it where I might need to poke the odd one now. There we are. So that's going to go under there. You won't see too much of it. It seems to be slightly smaller than this one, but I like a bit of a hint of it. And actually, what I can do if I want to see more of it is I can just chop it in half, because I would like to see a little bit more of it. So with my little chopper, I'll just chop down the middle, and then I can have a bit more of it showing. Although we want to cut this down because it's bigger than the card mat itself. And so I was looking at what colour card mat I'm going to use. So that's the 3 colours I've used. That is, I often do that. If I'm die cutting, I die cut out of a card mat size, so that when I'm mattering layering up, you don't really notice it. So I quite like a soft suede layer. It's whether or not I want it on crumb cake, and I'm thinking I do want it on crumb cake because that's got crumb cake in it, and I think that looks a bit better than on that one. Yeah, so I need to trim this down to the size I want. So I need to go down to my second mat size. Put all the measurements over on nigezza.co.uk. I could save those in my scrap box for using on other things. So now we're about ready to put it all together. So if that's going to layer on that, I'll probably ink around the edges, to be fair. Now I've cut it in half, I'm actually thinking I might just have it so you can see the dots there. So I want to ink around the edges of this. I want to do a little bit more, I think, on the edges of this, and then we need a sort of a I used some ribbon on this and put a nice little thank you. So I do want to do that, and we've got some neutral dots that I'm going to use, and I'm thinking I might do a bit of stamping around the edge of this as well. So I think I might actually use early espresso. Just so you've got a little bit of a hint there. Might do it on both layers. Yep. Gonna do some... Trouble is, when I start vintaging, I just go on forever. Where's my brush? I'm actually now thinking that it might look better with a very dark early espresso around it. Maybe. Just want to go around the edges of this. I might do an early espresso edging. So let's see how that's now looking. Might offset those. And then I might take some linen thread and just wind that round. I had a tied ribbon on the other one, but I'm thinking linen thread on this one. Yep, liking that. Right, so let's start sticking it all down. Okay, so now I need sentiments, and I just think want something little there. So I was having a little look. So we've got a little thank you there, which I think is quite swirly, quite vintagey looking. So I want something little there with it. So in our Stitch So Sweetly, we've got this tiny little die there, which I thought would cut that out. Now this is 90% of the size of it, so it is actually bigger. So it will just cut that out. So I'm going to use early espresso, I think, bring out the colour there. So this little offcut that we had, I'm going to stamp it on that and die cut it out. So let me just have a little look-see where that would fit on. So we want to stamp that, yeah, dead centre is what we're looking at. Not really dead centre, Jez, but I think that's fine. So I'm going to get that cut out, and I'm going to cut some of these doilies out of the other scrap and see what that's like. Okay, so that's those cut out, and yeah, quite liking that there. Love these little doilies. They'll do for another vintage project. So I want to give that a little bit of an ink. It's not dark enough. So I think that's better, and I like the fact that it's darker on one side than the other. I'll just go around the edges a little bit. That's cool. I'm liking that. So I'm going to get dimensional. I'm thinking I'm going to put a little bow on like I did in the other card. So I'm going to feed those underneath, and then that will pull them together a bit. Done it. Yep. Where's my scissors gone? There we go, and I might just pop a little glue dot underneath there to hold it in place. Roll one in half. There we go. And then I'm going to put some embellishments on it. Now I've got these are new, these classic matte dots. And they're black, basic grey, very vanilla and basic white. But I've got a crumb cake blend. So I'm gonna just colour the white with the blend. So just let them dry a sec. It won't take too long because they are alcohol markers. Stick that one down here. I think the stickies come off that one, so I'll put a little Tombow. Just stick that too. Let's pop the big one up there. Just our little finishing touch. So that's how I made that turn into that, making it look vintage. So we've done lots and lots of vintage making, shown you different ideas of how to colour and then add stamps to turn things into vintage looking things using embossing folders and stamps, blending brushes, etc. So hope that was useful. Hope you like that. Hope you'll go and take a look. I'm certainly looking forward to seeing other people's ideas and making things look vintage, because that's what I do. I do lots of vintage journals, and that could equally be a nice tag in a journal. It could be the front of a journal, even a journal cover. That would be nice, using a different sort of sentiment on it. So yeah, lots and lots of ideas. Love this stamp set to build up flowers. I think it's really pretty. So yeah, that is it. Non-vintage. And that's it, vintage. So All the details will be over on nigezza.co.uk. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and I'll see you all again soon. Bye for now.